Hey, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jennifer, and I'll be narrating today's story. This is a piece of human-written science fiction, so get comfortable and let's jump right in.
The mighty queen's cub nearly died, but the human's medicine arrived just in time. If you enjoy this channel, please take a moment to check if you're subscribed. The crystalline walls of the Valorian palace refracted light into 1,000 sapphire fractals as the diplomatic gala reached its crescendo. Solomon stood at the edge of the grand hall, nursing his 7th glass of unfamiliar Valorian wine, watching the pageantry with the detached observation of someone paid to be present but not quite welcome. His black tech-integrated uniform with its glowing cyan wrist accents marked him as the human medical attaché useful in crisis, invisible in celebration. Helqae dominated the center of the hall in a way that defied physics. Her azure blue hair caught the fractured light like living water, longer than Solomon had ever seen it, streaked with threads of silver that caught the glow of the ceremonial torches. The deep magenta pink of her skin seemed to deepen under the illumination, and the ornate robes she wore, layers of purple silk embroidered with gold that moved like liquid as she walked, suggested both warrior and aristocrat. She towered over most of her court, her pointed ears framing features of striking alien beauty, and when she moved, the crowd instinctively parted. Her cub stood beside her in miniature formal dress, a small pale green-skinned child with the same pointed ears, eyes wide with the particular exhaustion of any young creature forced to endure adult social functions. Solomon watched them with the clinical distance he'd perfected over 2 years as the lone human among the Valorian elite. They didn't want him here. The treaty mandated it. He was necessary but not desired, and he'd learned not to care. That was easier than expecting respect from a species that had conquered half the known galaxy. The music shifted. A new suite began, slower and more formal, and that was when the screaming started. Not Helqae's scream, hers came later, a sound like a starship tearing itself apart. The first scream belonged to one of the servers, a young Valorian male who'd been passing ceremonial drinks. His tray crashed to the floor, the glasses shattering in that peculiar way they did, and his hand went to his throat. Solomon's wine glass was on the nearest table before the second scream. The medical training that had earned him his position kicked in with brutal efficiency. His eyes moved across the scene, cataloging details, the server's face flushing a sickly gray-green beneath the magenta, his collapse, the sudden chaos as nearby guests backed away. Then Helqae's cub fell. The child simply dropped, as if someone had cut the strings holding him upright. He was too small to make much sound hitting the floor. He was small enough that for a moment, the crowd didn't even notice he'd fallen, not until Helqae moved. Solomon had heard stories about what the Valorian queen could do. Her military record was legendary across 3 sectors. But he'd never seen her move like that, not as a dignitary or a ruler, but as a mother. She crossed 20 feet of marble floor in seconds that felt impossible, and the crowd scattered in her wake like water before a bow. Her cry wasn't language anymore. It was something primal, something that made Solomon's hindbrain scream warnings. She cradled the cub against her chest, and her eyes went to her court healers. "Move," Solomon said. It wasn't a request. He was already moving, pushing through the crowd of Valorian nobility, who for the first time looked at him as something other than a decorative human. His wrist comm was already lighting up, interface glowing brighter cyan in the chaos. "Status?" he demanded, kneeling beside Helqae without asking permission. She turned her full attention to him, and for a moment her expression cycled through disbelief, rage, and desperation, so quickly he nearly missed the shift. But she didn't move away. She held the cub steady as Solomon's hands found the child's wrist, the pulse point behind those delicate pointed ears. The cub's heartbeat was there fast, too fast, stuttering and irregular. His skin was already cooling. Solomon ran his fingers down the small body, checking for signs of physical trauma, toxins, anything obvious. "What happened?" Solomon asked, though his eyes were still moving, still assessing. "He was standing beside me," Helqae said. Her voice carried the weight of 1,000 soldiers behind it, but underneath was something else, pure maternal terror. He was standing beside me, and then... The server who'd screamed first was unconscious now, his body seized in what looked like neurological shutdown. One of the healers was already working on him, hands glowing with pale Valorian medical energy that did absolutely nothing. Solomon's mind ran through differential diagnoses at speed. The server first, suggesting something in the food or drink. But the cub hadn't eaten or drunk anything. Solomon had watched him for the entire evening, the way any medical officer would watch any potential vulnerable population. So either the toxin was airborne, or his eyes went to the server's empty tray, to the ceremonial drinks, to Helqae's cub standing beside his mother, small enough to be at breath level with the passing servers, small enough to catch any vapor. Neurotoxin, Solomon said quietly. Vapor delivery, or it was on something the server touched before passing. Your son was downwind. Helqae's grip tightened on the cub. Fix it, she said. It wasn't a request. It was a command that had probably never been refused in her life. Solomon met her eyes for a moment. Get him to the medical wing. Now, move. He was already on his feet, already pulling up his wrist interface. The cyan lights on his uniform flared brighter as he accessed the palace medical systems, his fingers flying across the haptic interface. Around him, the ball dissolved into chaos. Valorian guards moved to secure the hall. The healers attempted to crowd around Helqae and her cub, but she swept them aside with one arm. She was looking at Solomon. You, she said, you come. Everyone else, away from my child. The Valorian healers actually stepped back. Centuries of tradition, overridden in a moment of maternal desperation. Solomon ran beside her, a human in a black uniform, glowing cyan in the half-light of the palace corridors, moving through the chambers of power like he belonged there. Helqae's personal guard moved to stop him, then saw their queen's expression and moved aside instead. The cub was dying in Helqae's arms, his small body already rigid with the progressive paralysis of neurotoxin shutdown. The medical wing was white and cold and lined with instruments that made no sense to Solomon's earth-trained eyes. But the basics of biology didn't change across species, and the cub's neurological collapse was following a pattern he recognized. Get me everything you have on the toxins used in Valorian assassination attempts in the last decade, Solomon said, not looking away from the cub. His hands were already checking pupil response, assessing the progression, cross-reference with compounds that affect neurological systems. Fast! The healers, one of the attending medical staff, started. We'll do what I tell them, or I leave, and your queen's child dies, Solomon said flatly. Your choice. Now move. There was a quality to certainty that transcended species. Solomon had spent his whole career using it, the absolute conviction that he knew what needed to happen next. Most of the time, it worked. Sometimes it didn't, but by the time anyone realized it, he was already 10 steps ahead. The healers moved. Helqae sat beside the medical platform where they'd placed her cub, her massive frame somehow seeming smaller, folded in on itself with worry. The cub's breathing was becoming shallower, more labored. The paralysis was spreading upward from the extremities. If it reached the respiratory system, if it reached his brainstem, there was no coming back from that. Solomon's eyes found the medical data scrolling across the Valorian interface. The commands were different, but the information was information. He scrolled through compound after compound, eliminating possibilities with brutal speed. Most Valorian poisons were designed to work through Valorian biology. Their healers had defenses against those. Something that affected a Valorian cub this quickly, this completely, had to be either unknown to the Valorian medical archive or... His breath caught. He'd seen this signature before. Not on Valorian records, but in the Earth medical archives he'd studied years ago. It was a plant-based compound, synthesized from something that grew in Earth's Amazon basin. A poison that had been studied in the 23rd century and then abandoned as too unpredictable, too dangerous even for its time. Someone had synthesized it, someone with knowledge of Earth compounds and access to a Valorian cub. Do you have any Earth-origin compounds in your medical stock? Solomon asked. Helqae's head came up. Why would we carry human medicines? Because someone used an Earth poison to kill your son, Solomon said quietly. And I might be the only person here who knows how to counteract it. The queen of the Valorian people, the warrior who commanded fleets and bent politicians to her will, looked at the human medical attaché like he was the only lifeline in a drowning ocean. Then save him, she said. The medical supplies he needed weren't in the Valorian wing. Solomon sent a guard to his quarters with a list of compounds and access codes, knowing it would take precious minutes the cub might not have. He worked with what he had, running diagnostics that made the attending healers shift uncomfortably. Their medicine worked through manipulation of the body's own healing energy. His worked through chemistry. The two paradigms were incompatible enough that his mere presence seemed to offend their methodology. but Helqae didn't move from her seat beside her child. Her eyes tracked Solomon's every movement, and when he'd explained what he suspected, she'd nodded once, a gesture of absolute authority followed by absolute faith directed at him. "The poison signature contains markers from earth plants," Solomon said, working as he spoke, not wasting motion on eye contact. "Someone who knew both Valorian biology and earth biochemistry created this. Someone human-adjacent worked with someone in your government to do this." "My counsel?" Helqae's voice was dangerous, but she kept it quiet. The cub needed silence. "Or someone above your counsel. Someone with access to your son and knowledge of when you'd be in a room where he could be exposed." Solomon pulled up the chemical formula on his interface, letting the Valorian healers see it. He knew what they were seeing, something that didn't match their training, something foreign and frightening. "This is theoretical-level synthesis. Whoever made this knew exactly what they were doing." Helqae was silent for a moment. Her hand rested on her child's forehead, her massive fingers gentle despite the strength that could shatter bone. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but underneath was a tremor only someone watching closely would notice. "How do we stop it?" Solomon pulled up a second formula. "There's an enzymatic inhibitor I can synthesize, earth-based, derived from a completely different plant compound. It won't neutralize the poison, it'll block its ability to bind to the neurological cells it targets. Your son's body will do the rest. Valorian healing ability is remarkable. If we can keep his system functioning long enough for that ability to activate, he'll recover." "How long?" Helqae asked. "I need access to my medical kit. 20 minutes to synthesize, then injection. 30 minutes to see if it's working." Solomon made himself meet her eyes. "I'll know if this works in 30 minutes, Helqae. Your healers can tell you it's hopeless before that time is up, but I'm telling you right now, I don't think it is." She studied his face like she was reading something written in his features. A queen evaluating a oathkeeper, a mother evaluating whether to trust a human with her child's life. "Do it," she said. The synthesization lab they set up was a strange hybrid of Valorian medicine and human chemistry. Solomon worked at a modified bench, pulling compounds from his emergency kit, using Valorian equipment he had to reverse engineer through trial and reading the settings by sound and intuition. The attending healers watched with expressions that ranged from skeptical to horrified. His hands stayed steady. This was what he did. This was what he'd trained for the moments when the textbooks didn't cover the situation and intuition was the only tool left. Helqae didn't leave the chamber. She stood at the observation window, watching her son's failing body on the medical platform. One of her hands was pressed against the transparent barrier, palm flat, as if she could push her will through the material and into him. Solomon didn't look at her. He couldn't afford the distraction. But he was aware of her presence, like he was aware of his own heartbeat, fundamental, essential, unimaginable to ignore. The compound took shape molecule by molecule under his hands. He could see the exact moment understanding flickered across the attending healers' faces when they realized he wasn't following a protocol, he was building something from first principles. Creating a medicine that shouldn't exist from knowledge that shouldn't apply to Valorian biology. The first batch was ready in 18 minutes. He ran it through their medical scanner, the Valorian instrumentation adapting to his specifications, or perhaps he was just learning to read the interface intuitively. The compound was perfect. Clean synthesis, exact molecular structure. "Ready?" one of the healers asked. "No," Solomon said, "but his son doesn't have time for me to be ready." He brought the injection to the medical platform. The cub's pupils were barely responsive now. The child's breathing had shallowed to a terrifying degree, barely moving the small chest. Helqae was suddenly beside Solomon, her massive form seeming to shrink down somehow, focused entirely on her offspring. "If this kills him," she started. "It won't," Solomon said. He didn't know that. He was guessing based on theory, on instinct, on a compound he'd studied once years ago and synthesized from memory. But his voice was certain. "Helqae, I promise you I'm not going to kill your son. I'm going to save him, but you have to trust me." She nodded once, a gesture of faith that felt too heavy for such a small movement. Solomon found the vein in the cub's neck, pale green skin over delicate structure, nothing like human anatomy but functional in all the ways that mattered. The injection was smooth, careful, precisely calibrated for the cub's body weight based on the medical data scrolling across the platform. He pushed the solution into the child's system. For a moment, nothing happened. The attending healers shifted. Helqae's grip on the edge of the platform tightened. Solomon watched the medical readouts. watching for any change, any sign that the compound was doing what he'd designed it to do. The cub's neural activity spiked. "That's it," Solomon said. "That's what we need. The inhibitor is blocking the toxin's attachment points. Look, the seizure activity is decreasing. His breathing is stabilizing." It was, marginally. The blue tone creeping into the cub's skin was fading back toward his natural pale green. The rigid tension in his small limbs seemed to ease. "How long until he wakes?" Helqae asked. "Hours. Maybe longer. His system is going to need rest to recover from the trauma." Solomon was already moving to the next priority, pulling up the diagnostic readouts, comparing them to baseline Valorian physiology. "But he's going to wake up. Helqae, your son is going to wake up." She was looking at her child with an expression Solomon had never seen on an alien warrior's face before. Pure, uncomplicated love, the kind that made everything else in the world irrelevant. When she looked at Solomon, that expression shifted into something more complex. "How did you know?" she asked. "How could you possibly have known what to do?" Solomon was already pulling off his gloves, already setting up monitoring protocols that would alert if anything changed in the cub's condition. "Because I study everything. Because Earth's mistakes are sometimes other people's poisons, and other people's poisons are sometimes salvation if you know how to read them backward." He turned to face her. For the first time since he'd knelt beside her child in the ruined gala, he really looked at her. The fear was draining from her features, replaced by something he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, yes, but also something like recognition, like she was seeing him for the first time. "You risked yourself," she said, "coming here, treating my child with an untested compound. If it had failed, my people would have blamed you, executed you, likely." "Yes," Solomon said simply, "but your son would have lived longer with hope than without it. That was worth the risk." Helqae stepped closer. Her voice, when she spoke, was quieter than he'd ever heard it. "Rest," she said. "You need medical oversight. You're shaking." Solomon looked down at his hands and realized she was right. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the accumulated exhaustion of the evening was catching up. He nodded, accepting the help of one of the attending healers without argument. But as they led him to a recovery chamber, he caught Helqae's eyes one more time. And in them was something that hadn't been there that morning. The knowledge that a human had saved her legacy, her purpose, the thing she valued above everything else. The knowledge that she owed him a debt that transcended species. Solomon's improvised lab was a study in organized chaos. Medical compounds from his emergency kit were arranged in precise rows across the Valorian synthesis bench, their colors vivid against the white surface. He worked without full sleep, running on stimulants he ordinarily reserved for genuine emergencies, which this definitely was. If the cub's condition deteriorated, if the initial injection had only bought time without solving the underlying problem, he needed alternatives synthesized and ready. 16 hours into the crisis, he was on his third formulation of enzymatic inhibitors, each one slightly modified based on the cub's response to the first injection. The child was stable but not improving as quickly as Solomon would have liked. The paralysis had stopped spreading, but it hadn't fully receded either. The healing energy that Helqae's people relied on was working, but slowly, like something in the system was interfering with the process. Helqae hadn't left her son's side, except for brief periods when protocol demanded it. When she did leave, she came to Solomon's lab. The queen of a mighty people stood in the doorway of his improvised workspace at hour 22 of the crisis, still in her ceremonial robes, though they were disheveled now, streaked with traces of her cub's pale green blood. Her blue hair was knotted in a hasty binding. The magenta pink of her skin looked pale, exhausted, frightened. "How is he?" Solomon asked, not looking up from the compound he was analyzing, but he was aware of her presence the way he was aware of breathing fundamental, essential, never absent. "Unchanged from 2 hours ago," Helqae said. She moved closer, looking at the work without understanding it, the way a warrior might examine battle tactics they didn't train for. "Your healing is slow. Your son's body is fighting the poison while simultaneously fighting the treatment," Solomon said. He was running the synthesis again, optimizing the molecular structure one more time. "Valorian healing ability is incredible, but it's designed for Valorian problems. This toxin is Earth-based. Your system doesn't have natural defenses against it. Mine might." "Explain," Helqae said. There was command in her voice, but underneath was genuine curiosity. Solomon finally looked at her. He gestured for her to sit, and after a moment's hesitation, she did, perching on the edge of a Valorian medical stool like a warrior uncomfortable being stationary. Earth had diseases and poisons that Valorian biology would find instantly fatal, he said. We don't have your healing ability. We can't just activate some internal mechanism and fix ourselves. So humans learned chemistry, learned to synthesize compounds that would work around what our bodies can't do naturally. Your son's healing ability works fast. I've seen it, but it's working against a poison it doesn't have evolutionary experience with. So I'm trying to create something that acknowledges both systems. Something that blocks the poison's target while leaving enough room for your healing ability to work. Helqae absorbed this. Your people survive by invention. Our people survive by invention because we had no other choice, Solomon said. We didn't have the physical power of your kind. We couldn't rely on internal healing mechanisms. We had to use our minds to compensate. It's made us good at creative problem solving in situations with no clear solution. It is also making you indispensable, Helqae said quietly. She watched him work with an intensity that suggested she was studying not just the compounds but him. In my entire life, I have not depended on anyone. I am the queen. I command, and others obey. My strength is in my certainty. Solomon understood what she was saying without her saying all of it. That certainty was cracking. That depending on him on a human was revealing weaknesses in her worldview, in her understanding of her own power. Strength and vulnerability are not opposites, he said. He was thinking as he spoke, not reciting something he'd planned. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you need help. Helqae's eyes met his. For a moment, they were just two beings in a lab, lit by the soft glow of medical equipment, two people united by the single purpose of keeping a child alive. "Why are you here?" she asked suddenly. "Stationed on Valorian, treated like a decoration, dismissed by my people. Why did you accept this posting?" Solomon had to consider his answer. The true answer was simpler and more complicated than she probably wanted, because he believed connection mattered, that understanding between species was possible, that staying close to the most powerful civilization in known space and building bridges was worth being treated as inferior. But he knew how that sounded to someone like Helqae. "Because someone needs to be here," he said finally. "Someone who can think differently than you do. Someone who has skills your system doesn't value until something like this happens. And because I believe that humans and Valorians are stronger together than apart." Helqae was quiet. Then she said, "My council will demand answers when this is resolved. They will want to know how an assassination attempt was made, how someone human adjacent was involved in attempting to kill my offspring. They will want accountability." "I know," Solomon said. He did know. He'd been thinking about it while he worked, running through the implications. Someone had knowledge of Earth biology and access to a Valorian court. That was a security failure at the highest level. "I will protect you," Helqae said. It sounded like a vow. "However my people react, you have my protection." Solomon looked at her, really looked at her, at the exhausted warrior who was still holding herself with the posture of a queen despite having barely slept in a day. At the magenta-pink skin that marked her as utterly alien, utterly other, and yet somehow achingly familiar. "Thank you," he said. He meant it in ways that went beyond gratitude for protection. Helqae stood. "I return to my son. Complete your work, Solomon. I have faith in you." She left him to the compounds and the glowing readouts, but something had shifted. When the queen of the Valorian people came back 3 hours later with water for him and stood guard while he rested for 20 minutes, it was not a gesture of political necessity. It was a gesture of something else entirely. 37 hours into the crisis, Solomon made the discovery he'd been dreading. He'd pushed the poison analysis as far as the Valorian archives would let him, but there were gaps. The compound was too sophisticated, too intentional. Someone hadn't just created a poison. They'd created it knowing exactly what Valorian healers would try and how to defeat those attempts. Someone with intimate knowledge of Valorian defenses and Earth biochemistry. The answer came when he cross-referenced the molecular signature against the Valorian scientific database. There was a match in papers published 11 years ago. Research into hybrid biochemistry, the intersection of Earth and Valorian compounds. The researcher's name was Sartheth Vor. Solomon pulled up the service records on his interface and felt his stomach drop. Sartheth Vor was a Valorian scientist, yes, but she'd also spent 3 years on an Earth research exchange program. 3 years studying human biochemistry and human medicine, 3 years with unprecedented access to Earth knowledge. and she was listed as a consultant to Helqae's Security Council. He stared at the name on his interface, running the logic forward. Sartheth had the knowledge. She had the access. She had the position to know when Helqae and her cub would be in the gala hall. But why? What possible motivation would a Valorian scientist have to poison the Queen's own child? Unless it wasn't about the cub at all. Unless the cub was the target only as a way to hurt Helqae, to undermine her authority, to create exactly the kind of chaos that ensued. Unless someone else had hired Sartheth, someone with a different agenda. Solomon pulled up his notes on the poison itself. The compound was sophisticated, but it was expensive to synthesize. Whoever had ordered it had resources. Sartheth might be brilliant, but she wasn't wealthy enough to do this alone. The implications spiraled outward. A conspiracy within Helqae's government, someone high-ranking, someone with access to both Valorian security infrastructure and Earth origin contacts. Solomon made a decision. He compiled his findings into a secure file and went to find the Queen. Helqae was in the cub's recovery chamber, where she'd spent most of the last day and a half. The child was improving color, returning to his skin, breathing steadier, but he was still unconscious, still fragile. Helqae sat beside the small medical platform, one hand resting gently on her son's forehead, her eyes closed. She opened them immediately when Solomon entered. The warrior's alertness was back, cutting through exhaustion. "His condition?" she asked. "Improving, stable. I think he's going to make it, Helqae." Solomon made sure she saw the certainty in his face. "But I found something you need to know." She stood, moving away from her child without taking her eyes off Solomon's face. Whatever she read there, it made her gesture for him to follow her into the anteroom, away from the cub's resting place. "Tell me," she said, "monarch now, warrior now, the vulnerability temporarily locked away." Solomon laid it out methodically. The compound's sophistication, the researcher who'd created it, the access and opportunity, the likelihood of a larger conspiracy. Helqae's expression shifted through fury, betrayal, calculation, and back to fury. When she finally moved, it was controlled violence, her fist slamming into the wall hard enough to crack the Valorian composite material. "Sartheth," she said. "I invited her into my council myself. I believed in her research." "Someone else is behind this," Solomon said quietly. "Sartheth couldn't have synthesized the compound and developed a distribution plan alone. She was hired, or coerced, or blackmailed. But there's someone bigger involved." Helqae's jaw tightened. "My government, my own people could have hired her to sabotage me." "Yes," Solomon said. He didn't soften it. She didn't need softness right now. She needed truth. Political opponents, military factions, trade councils. Anyone with reason to destabilize your authority. Helqae was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but underneath was the rumble of barely contained fury. "I will deal with this. I will find whoever authorized this assassination attempt. I will take their power, their position, their everything." "I know," Solomon said. And then, more gently, "But first, your son wakes up. First, we make sure he's truly safe. The investigation happens after." Helqae turned to look at him. Her eyes were dark, with the promise of vengeance, with the weight of betrayal, with the complexity of being a ruler who just discovered her own government had tried to kill her child. "You're right," she said. "He comes first, always." She went back to the recovery chamber, but she didn't ask Solomon to leave. He stood in the anteroom, maintaining the medical monitoring, watching the readouts that showed the cub's condition continuing its slow improvement. The first injection had bought time. The subsequent formulations were buying recovery, but somewhere in the Valorian political structure someone was still free, still dangerous, and they might try again. Solomon's hand moved to his wrist comm, activating his encrypted Earth channel. If there was a human involved in this conspiracy, if there was someone on Earth who'd helped synthesize the poison, then the problem extended beyond Valorian borders. He sent a message to the Earth Diplomatic Corps, flagging the security concern. Then he went back to his work, running new formulations, preparing for the possibility that the cub's condition might still deteriorate, that the poison might have layers Solomon hadn't yet discovered. But this time, he wasn't just a medical officer trying to save a patient. He was part of something larger. He was part of Helqae's world now, woven into her story in a way that couldn't be unraveled. 42 hours after the poisoning, the cub's eyes opened. Helqae was with him, as she had been for nearly all of the preceding hours, and her reaction was instantaneous. She was on her feet, her hand gentle on her son's small shoulder, her voice soft and urgent. Kale, can you hear me? The child's eyes moved, unfocused at first, then gradually settling on his mother's face. Recognition flickered there slowly but present. The cub's mouth opened, but no sound came immediately. Solomon watched from the medical interface, reading the neurological recovery data as it scrolled across his wrist comm. The inhibitor had worked. The paralysis was receding. The toxin's hold on the child's nervous system was breaking. Water, Solomon said, coming to the platform with a nutrient solution that the Valorian healers had prepared. Small amounts, and only with your permission. Helqae looked at him with an expression that made his breath catch. It was gratitude, yes, but it was more than that. It was the recognition of faith rewarded, of a desperate gamble that had paid off. It was the look of a mother who would owe a debt to this man for the rest of her life. Give it to him, she said. Solomon offered the nutrient solution to the cub, helping the child drink in careful, measured sips. Kale's throat worked, the response improving with each swallow. Color was returning to his skin in earnest now, the pale green deepening to the healthy shade it should be. How long until he's fully functional? Helqae asked. His nervous system is recovering well. The paralysis is receding faster than I expected, actually. Your healing ability is remarkable. Solomon was watching the medical data carefully, looking for any sign of relapse, of hidden complications. He'll need rest. Recovery will take days, maybe weeks. There might be lingering sensitivity to the toxin if he's exposed again, and his immune system will be compromised for a while. But Kale is going to be completely healthy again. Helqae exhaled, and it was like watching a mountain settle. The tension that had been holding her together for 42 hours released, just slightly. She reached out and pulled her son into a gentle embrace, careful of the medical monitoring equipment, and Kale's small arms came up to wrap around his mother's neck. You saved him, Helqae said. She was looking at Solomon over her son's shoulder, and her eyes held depths he was only beginning to understand. You saved my child. Solomon nodded, not trusting his voice. He was running on fumes and chemical stimulants, exhaustion pulling at the edges of his awareness, but he would stand here as long as it took. He would keep watching the readouts, keep monitoring Kale's recovery, keep being present for whatever came next. A Valorian healer entered the chamber, one of the senior ones, marked by the particular shimmer of their robes. The Queen, the healer said carefully, your council is requesting a status update, and there are security matters requiring your attention. Helqae looked like she wanted to refuse. Solomon could see the calculation in her expression. Duty versus desire, queen versus mother. Go, Solomon said. I'll stay with Kale. I won't leave him. Helqae studied him for a moment. Then she gently extracted herself from her son's embrace, kissed the cub's forehead, and stood. If there is any change, she started. I will contact you immediately, Solomon finished. Helqae, go. Your people need you. Kale needs his mother to be the queen again, not just sitting in a recovery chamber. She nodded, but before she left, she did something that made the attending healers shift uncomfortably. She reached out and touched Solomon's face, her massive hand gentle against his cheek. The gesture was familiar, intimate, the kind of contact that acknowledged more than gratitude. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. Then she was gone, and Solomon was left alone with a recovering child and the lingering echo of her touch on his skin. Kyle watched Solomon with the particular intensity of a young creature still processing the world. After a moment, the cub asked in a voice rough from disuse, Who are you? My name is Solomon, he said. I'm a healer. A human, Kale said, not a question. The cub had clearly heard his mother talking about Solomon's origin. Yes, Solomon confirmed, I'm a human healer. And I very much like your mother, so I made very sure you were going to be okay. Kale processed this with the literal-minded logic of children everywhere. Mother likes you too. She's different when you're here. Solomon didn't know what to say to that, so he focused on the medical readouts instead. But he was acutely aware that Kale was right. Helqae was different when he was present. The warrior queen who commanded fleets and bent governments to her will was somehow simultaneously more vulnerable and more herself. Over the next several hours, as Kale recovered and the cub's health steadily improved, the political implications began to emerge. Valorian security forces moved through the palace in careful, controlled patterns. Helqae's council was convened in emergency session. And through his various contacts, Solomon became aware that Sarthath Vor had disappeared. The investigation would continue, but not immediately. For now, there was only the recovery, only the knowledge that a child who had nearly died was going to live, because Solomon had known something his people had learned through necessity and survival. When Helqae returned to the recovery chamber 18 hours later, she was still in her formal robes, but her eyes carried the weight of difficult decisions made. She looked at her son, who was now awake and alert, eating actual food and complaining about the tastelessness of medical nutrition. Then she looked at Solomon. "Come," she said. "My son sleeps. And there are things I want to show you, things about our people, about our world, things that my council should see, so they understand what you've done for us." Solomon understood that she was not asking, but he also understood that this was an invitation to something more than political demonstration. This was the queen of the Valorian people, introducing a human into her world in a way that would change his status, his position, his entire life among her people. He followed her. The queen's private chambers were nothing like Solomon had imagined. He'd expected ostentation, grandeur, the kind of overwhelming display of power that characterized Valorian public spaces. Instead, he found himself in a space that was almost intimate, lower ceilings, softer lighting, the kind of lived-in comfort that didn't broadcast strength but rather revealed it. Helqae moved through the chambers with a grace that transcended her physical size. She removed the heavy outer layers of her ceremonial robes, piece by piece, each one falling away to reveal the warrior's body beneath. Scars marked her skin, some thin and pale, some darker with age. Battle marks, mission marks, the physical record of a lifetime spent commanding empires. "These are the marks of my duty," Helqae said, running one massive hand down her arm, tracing a particularly deep scar that ran from shoulder to elbow. "Everyone tells the story of a decision I made, a life I took, a war I fought. For my people, they are badges of strength." She turned to face him fully, and Solomon saw her as he hadn't before, not as a distant queen or a desperate mother, but as a person. Complex, scarred, powerful, and beneath the power, vulnerable in a way that had probably terrified her before Kale was poisoned. "I have never trusted anyone with my full vulnerability," Helqae said. "My people respect strength, they follow certainty. A queen who shows fear is a queen who loses power, so I learned not to feel it. Or to feel it only when I was completely alone." Solomon didn't move. He understood what she was doing, what it meant for a Valorian to reveal themselves like this. It was her offering him access to a part of her that the rest of her civilization would see as weakness. "Then Kale was poisoned, and I had fear I could not hide," she continued. "And you saw it, and you didn't turn away. You didn't judge, you just helped. Because that was the right thing to do." She moved closer to him, her massive frame somehow seeming to shrink down when she was near enough that he could see the details of her features, the particular shade of her magenta-pink skin, the silver streaks in her blue hair that caught the light. "I have commanded 1,000 warriors," Helqae said quietly, "but I have never trusted one of them the way I trusted you at the moment that mattered most." Solomon found his voice. "Strength and vulnerability are not opposites." "I know that now," Helqae said. She reached out and touched his face again, her hand warm against his skin. "Because of you." She kissed him then, and it was nothing like the formal gestures of diplomacy. It was claiming, surrendering, opening simultaneously. It was a queen choosing to be vulnerable with someone who had earned that vulnerability through action rather than position. Solomon kissed her back, his hands finding the curve of her waist, the strength of her shoulders. She was twice his size and phenomenally stronger, and somehow that made the moment more intimate rather than less. She was choosing to be gentle with him, choosing to trust her power entirely in her own control. When they parted, Helqae's eyes held something new. Not just gratitude, not just respect, something that looked like affection. "My counsel will be difficult," she said. "About us." "I know," Solomon said. "Humans and Valorians are not supposed to intermix, politically or personally. It violates centuries of doctrine." "Yes," Helqae said, "but I find I no longer care what my council finds acceptable. You saved my son. You treated me as an equal when I was most vulnerable. You showed me that strength comes in forms I didn't recognize." She moved to her window, and Solomon followed her. The view was vast, the Valorian capital sprawling beneath them, lights glowing in the darkness. "My people are not wrong to be careful about human integration. Your kind could disrupt our society, challenge our beliefs, force us to question our assumptions about our own superiority. Yes, Solomon said simply. And I find that I want that, Helqae continued. I want to be challenged. I want to know what a human values when they're not afraid of me. I want. She trailed off, looking back at him. I want you to stay, not as a medical attaché, as something more. Solomon understood that she was offering him something enormous, not just political position, not just safety, but a role in her life that transcended their respective species. He moved to stand beside her at the window, his smaller frame dwarfed by hers, and he was aware of how striking they must look, the tiny human and the mighty Valorian queen silhouetted against the light. Then I'll stay, he said. Helqae took his hand, her fingers wrapping carefully around his wrist. It was a gesture of connection and also of control, a reminder of the strength she was carefully managing around him. But it was also a gesture of trust, the kind of contact that acknowledged her power while choosing not to exercise it. They stood at the window as the Valorian night deepened around them, and for the first time since Solomon had arrived on this world, he felt like he truly belonged here. The investigation into the assassination attempt consumed the next week, but it didn't consume Solomon and Helqae's nights. The queen had made a political choice. She was integrating the human more deeply into her society, publicly enough that her council couldn't pretend it wasn't happening, carefully enough that she retained plausible deniability if the political fallout became too severe. Solomon was now listed as a medical consultant to the royal household, which gave him unprecedented access to the palace, the records, and by extension, the investigation itself. Sarthethvor was located in a laboratory in the lower city, where she'd been synthesizing the compound with help from 2 human scientists who had come through the diplomatic corps with forged credentials. The network was larger than Solomon had anticipated, an organized conspiracy that spanned species and planetary boundaries. But the money trail led higher. Solomon sat across from Helqae in her War Council chamber, surrounded by Valorian military officers and intelligence specialists as they walked through the evidence. A general named Kef had authorized the expenditure of funds. An admiral named Sorath had provided security access, and a counselor named Yvel had arranged the logistics of getting the poisoned compound into the gala. Helqae's expression never changed as she listened to the evidence, but Solomon could read the micro-expressions beneath the calm disappointment, anger, the particular pain of betrayal from people she'd trusted. Their motivation? She asked when the briefing concluded. Trade policy, one of the intelligence officers said. You proposed opening direct commercial channels with Earth. These 3 all have financial interests in maintaining trade monopolies with human intermediaries. Removing you would have allowed the hardline faction to resume control and block the direct channels. Helqae absorbed this, find their assets, liquidate them, strip them of rank, and place them in secure custody. They'll stand trial, but not in open court. This trial will be conducted privately, and its results will be sealed. I don't want the political scandal of a public trial spreading across the galaxy. Understood, Your Majesty, the intelligence officer said. When the council adjourned, Helqae gestured for Solomon to remain. When they were alone, she moved to her window, the same view as her personal chambers, but filtered through the formal space of her war room. 3 people, she said quietly. 3 people I trusted with matters of state, all willing to kill my son. Solomon crossed the space between them and stood beside her, not touching but present. They would have succeeded if I hadn't been here. If you hadn't been willing to consider a solution outside your traditional healing methods. Yes, Helqae said. Which is why I'm keeping you here. Which is why I'm openly supporting your position in my court despite the political cost. Your council is angry, Solomon said. He'd seen it in their expressions during the briefing, the resentment toward him, the sense that a human was encroaching on spaces he had no right to occupy. My council will adapt, Helqae said, because I am their queen, and I have spoken, and because Kale is alive and he would not be without you. She finally turned to look at him, and her expression held the authority of someone who had made a choice and would stand by it regardless of consequences. The political situation is stable for now, she said. The conspirators are in custody, the investigation is contained, and my son is fully recovered and already asking when you'll play with him again. Despite everything, Solomon smiled. Tell him soon. I'm not as strong as his mother, but I know some Earth games that might interest him. He asked if humans always felt so small, Helqae said. There was amusement in her voice now. I told him that humans were measured by different standards. That smallness meant nothing if you had the right kind of strength. Solomon understood what she was doing, reframing him to her people, to her son, as valuable on his own terms rather than as a lesser version of something Valorian. It was political, yes, but it was also personal. She was telling her people and her child that Solomon belonged here. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," Helqae said. "When my council comes to you, wanting to know how you synthesize the counteragent, when they want to understand Earth medicine, when they start seeing human knowledge as something to integrate rather than dismiss, that's when you thank me by making sure it's worth the political capital I'm spending." She moved to her desk and pulled up a data file on her interface. "I'm reopening the medical exchange program with Earth. Your people will send their best minds. My people will send ours. And in 5 years, there will be doctors trained in both systems, healers who understand how to use Earth and Valorian knowledge together." Solomon saw it then, the full scope of what she was doing. Not just protecting him personally, not just endorsing the relationship between them, but fundamentally changing how her civilization would relate to his. Elevating what had once been deemed unattainable human-Valorian integration into policy. "That's ambitious," he said. "That's necessary," Helqae corrected. "You showed me that my people's way is not the only way. You showed me that strength comes in forms I didn't recognize. I would be a poor queen if I didn't learn from that lesson." She stood, and Solomon could see the queen reasserting herself over the vulnerable woman who'd been holding his hand in the darkness. But the vulnerability was still there, just carefully managed. "Come," she said, "Kale has been asking for you, and I think it's time you had your first formal dinner in the royal family. My council will attend. They'll see that you belong here, in this space, at this table." Solomon followed her through the palace corridors, acutely aware that he was crossing a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. By tomorrow, the entire Valorian civilization would know that the human medical attaché was intimate with their queen, would know that she was integrating his knowledge into their systems, would know that everything about the balance of power between their species had shifted. It was the most terrifying and most right thing that had happened to him since Kale was poisoned. The week following the formal dinner with the council was a strange intersection of public acceptance and private intensity. Solomon had been given a suite of rooms adjacent to Helqae's chambers, a gesture that was simultaneously about convenience and about political statement. The palace guards no longer regarded him with suspicion. The medical staff deferred to his input on treatments. And Helqae made no pretense of maintaining traditional boundaries around him. But the nights were when everything else fell away. Helqae's personal chambers were a world unto themselves, a space where the warrior queen became something else entirely. She moved with a different grace, slower, more deliberate. She would dismiss her attendants early and light the soft bioluminescent panels that made the massive room glow with something like candlelight. One night, about a week after the formal dinner, Solomon found her standing at the window in one of her private robes, something that clung to her powerful frame without the formality of ceremonial dress. The magenta pink of her skin was visible from shoulder to knee, scars and strength rendered in full detail. "Your council is planning a trade delegation to Earth," Helqae said without preamble. "They want you to lead it, to introduce Earth medicine formally to the primary medical academy." Solomon moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability in her voice despite the practical nature of what she was saying. "How long would I be gone?" 3 months minimum. Perhaps longer, depending on how the delegation proceeds. Solomon came to stand beside her. "And you want me to go?" "I want you to go because it matters for the future of our peoples," Helqae said. "But if you choose not to go, I will support that choice." It was a gift, what she was offering, the choice, the power to decide, the knowledge that she would accept his decision. It was also a test. Solomon took her hand. "I'll go. It matters too much not to. But I'm coming back to you." "You don't know that," Helqae said softly. "Humans are unpredictable. You might find Earth appealing. You might decide you prefer your own kind." Solomon turned to face her fully. She was so much larger than him, so much more powerful, and yet in this moment she seemed uncertain. Vulnerable in a way that the warrior queen with her armies and her authority couldn't be. "Helqae," he said. "I chose to come to Valorian when my people told me I was risking my life. I chose to synthesize a poison antidote from memory and intuition when every reasonable voice told me it would fail. I chose to stay even when your council made it clear my presence was politically destabilizing." He brought her hand to his chest, over his heart. "I'm not going to Earth to find something else." I'm going to Earth to bring something back, to show my people what I've found here, what I've found in you. Helqae's eyes glistened, which Solomon had never seen before. The mighty queen, the warrior, the powerful being who commanded fleets, was allowing herself to cry. I have given you everything, she said. My trust, my vulnerability, my support. I have made you part of my world when my council said I was destroying it, and you're leaving. For a season, Solomon said. But Helqae, listen to me. I'm not leaving because I want to. I'm leaving because what we're building is too big for just us. It needs foundation. It needs precedent. It needs your people and my people to understand that this is possible, that we can work together, that we can build something new. He pulled her down to him, his small hands finding the curve of her face, and he kissed her with all the intensity of someone who was about to leave and wanted to imprint the moment into memory. She responded with controlled strength, her massive form somehow gentle, her powerful hands careful as they held him. When you come back, she started. When I come back, Solomon interrupted, I'm going to ask you something you'll say yes to, because by then your people will be ready for it, and my people will be ready for it. And there will be no political reason for you to say no. What are you asking? Helqae whispered. Trust me, Solomon said. Let me go. Let me do this work, and then let me come back and ask you something that will change everything. Helqae nodded slowly, and then she surrendered completely. The queen became just Helqae, the woman who had learned vulnerability through terror and had chosen to remain vulnerable with someone she trusted. They moved together through the night, careful and intense, powerful and delicate, two beings from different worlds, learning each other with a tenderness that acknowledged both the gulf between them and the connection that had bridged it. By morning, Solomon had only hours before the delegation ship would launch. 3 months on Earth turned into 5. The Medical Academy collaboration was exponentially more complex than Solomon had anticipated. Earth's medical infrastructure was decades behind Valorian technology, but Earth's biochemistry was centuries ahead in specific applications. Synthesizing the integration required not just knowledge transfer but fundamental reimagining of how medicine could work when you combined two completely different approaches. Solomon lived in a blur of lectures and synthesis labs, video conferences with Helqae that grew shorter as the political situation on Valorian grew more complicated. The integration was working better than anyone had expected, but it was also causing resistance. Military factions saw Valorian reliance on human medical knowledge as weakness. Trade councils saw it as a threat to their economic model. And a faction within Helqae's government was quietly working to undermine her authority by portraying her relationship with Solomon as a compromising personal connection that was affecting her judgment. The message from Helqae's security chief came through an encrypted channel on Solomon's private comm. Kale was sick. Not the poison again, something worse. The poison had damaged the child's immune system more extensively than Solomon had initially realized. With Solomon gone and Valorian healers insisting that they didn't need human medical oversight for routine immune recovery, Kale's condition had deteriorated into a dangerous infection. Solomon booked passage on the fastest civilian transport available. Helqae met him at the landing platform herself. No formal ceremony, no public acknowledgement. Just the queen pulling a human into a private dock and kissing him with the intensity of someone who had been terrified they wouldn't see him again. How bad? Solomon asked immediately. The healers say it will resolve on its own, Helqae said. But Kale is in pain and the infection is not improving. I wanted to contact you, but my political enemies were using it as ammunition if you came back. They said I was weak, dependent on human intervention, unfit to rule. So you let your son suffer, Solomon said flatly. I was hoping the infection would resolve before. Helqae's voice trailed off. I made a choice between Kale and my throne. I chose my throne. And I was wrong. Solomon didn't have time to process the weight of that admission. He pulled up his comm and started accessing Kale's medical data as they moved through the palace corridors. The infection was serious, but not immediately life-threatening. It was also exactly the kind of infection that responded well to human antibiotics combined with Valorian healing technique. He reached the child's chamber and found Kale feverish and uncomfortable, the Valorian healers helpless in the face of something that didn't respond to their power-based approach. Everyone except the queen out, Solomon commanded. The healers looked like they wanted to argue, but Helqae's gesture sent them away. Solomon worked with the focus that had saved Kale once before. He synthesized an antibiotic from Earth compounds, calibrated for Valorian physiology and the specific bacterial infection that had taken hold. He administered it while activating the child's own healing mechanisms with a technique he'd developed in collaboration with Valorian medicine, pushing the human drug through the system while using Valorian healing energy to direct it toward the infection site. The fever broke within 6 hours. When Kale woke, the infection was gone. The child's relief was palpable, and his first question was whether Solomon was staying this time. Solomon looked at Helqae and saw the conflict written across her face, the queen who had to think of her government, the mother who wanted to beg him to stay. The woman who had learned vulnerability and found herself powerless in the face of political enemies. "Yes," Solomon said, making the decision then and there. "I'm staying. Your mother and I have something to work out, and it's more important than anything else." That night, after Kale was fully recovered and sleeping soundly, Helqae brought Solomon to the formal throne room. It was empty of her court, just the two of them standing in the massive space where she wielded power over her civilization. "My enemies are saying I'm unfit," Helqae said without preamble. "That my relationship with you is clouding my judgment, that I'm letting human concerns override Valorian interests." "Is it true?" Solomon asked. "Partially," Helqae said. "I did let my political concerns override my son's health. I did choose my throne over my child, but not because of you. Because I'm a Valorian queen, and my people come first in my training, in my doctrine, in my understanding of duty." She moved closer to him. "But you made me realize that's not the choice I want to make, that there's a different way to be a queen, one that acknowledges both my duty and my love, both my authority and my vulnerability." Solomon understood what was happening. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm integrating you fully," Helqae said. "Not as a medical consultant, not as a political alliance, but as a partner, a voice in my council. Someone whose opinion matters because you've proven you understand both worlds and both peoples." She descended from her throne and actually knelt before this small human who had saved her child twice and changed her understanding of strength. "I'm asking you to stay," she said, "not because I'm weak or dependent, but because I'm stronger when you're here. I'm asking you to help me rule, help me bridge the gap between our peoples, help me become the queen who can hold both power and vulnerability, both duty and love." Solomon knelt too, meeting her at eye level, their size difference suddenly irrelevant. "Yes," he said, "yes to all of it." The cub who insisted on being called Kale now that he was fully recovered and demonstrating the particular independence of healthy children everywhere played in the palace gardens, while Solomon and Helqae watched from a private terrace. 6 months had passed since Solomon had returned from Earth. 6 months of integration work, of political restructuring, of slowly convincing the Valorian people that human knowledge was not a threat but an enhancement. The medical exchange program was now well established, with human doctors training alongside Valorian healers, creating a new generation of practitioners who understood both systems. The resistance had diminished as the results left no room for doubt. Patients who would have suffered chronic pain under Valorian medicine alone were healing completely with the combined approach. Infections that had been fatal became treatable. The synthesis was working. Helqae sat beside him on the terrace, her massive form relaxed in a way it never would be in public. Her blue hair was unbound, falling over her shoulder, and she was holding the small data tablet that contained the results of their latest medical collaboration. "The Academy reports that the human-Valorian medical training program has a waiting list," she said, amusement in her voice. "Your people are trying to get their best minds into Valorian institutions. My people are requesting placement in Earth universities to study human biochemistry." "It's working," Solomon said. "This is what I wanted when I came here. Not to prove humans superior, not to infiltrate Valorian civilization, but to build bridges that show both our peoples are stronger together." He turned to look at her. "Thank you." "For what?" Helqae asked. "For being willing to change. For letting me save your son the first time. For letting me save him the second time. For loving me despite, or maybe because of, everything we are to each other." Helqae set the tablet aside and pulled him into her lap the way she did when they were alone, her massive frame making him seem impossibly small, impossibly safe. It was a position that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago, the queen cradling a human like a child, the warrior showing such tenderness. "I want to ask you something," Helqae said quietly. "Something I asked my advisors about, and they said was unprecedented, and my council said was politically destabilizing, and my people said was wrong. Solomon lifted his head to look at her. What? I want to make you my consort, Helqae said. Not secretly, not quietly, but openly, formally. On the steps of the palace, with my people watching, with your people watching through the communications channels, I want to declare that you are my partner in ruling, my partner in life, my partner in building the future of both our civilizations. Solomon felt the weight of what she was offering, the political cost, the cultural violation, the sheer audacity of it, and he felt the rightness of it too. Yes, he said simply. Helqae kissed him as their son played in the gardens below, as the Valorian sun set over the crystalline city, as the future they were building took one more step toward reality. The poisoning had nearly destroyed everything. But from that crisis had come something stronger, a queen who had learned to be vulnerable, a human who had learned to belong, a bridge between species that would last for generations. When Kale came running up the terrace steps asking what they were doing, Solomon answered with the truth, "We're making the future." The child considered this seriously, then asked if the future had snacks. Both his mother and his almost stepfather laughed, the sound echoing across the gardens, the sound of two worlds learning to speak the same language.
And that brings us to the end of today's story. Thanks for taking the time to listen. I really appreciate it. This channel is all about original human-focused science fiction, and every story is presented as a part of a larger collection. If you'd like to continue, there's another story from this channel on screen now that fits right alongside this one. Feel free to jump into that next, and I'll see you there.